Well, we have with us today a very special guest by the name of James Bartley. And he is a man who has lived a very unusual life. He is giving us some time today, early in the morning in Australia. And his time is limited. He's got a lot of things to do. He's a very busy man doing very good things for humanity. And I just wanted to get him on the podcast because this podcast, Transition to New Terra, is a way for guests to come on who have unique ideas about how humanity can move forward in the transition from old Earth, which is the slave matrix, to New Terra, where we are free and responsible persons. So, James Bartley, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jock. Pleased to be here. It's quite an honor.
Well, you're down there in Australia. Now, you don't have an Australian accent. You didn't grow up in Australia, I assume.
No, my wife brought me out here. So I lived in America most of my life. I lived in Texas when I was a young boy. My dad was stationed at Naval Air Station, Corpus Christi, and also what later became Naval Air Facility, Kingsville. So we lived right there in the Gulf of Mexico. And after a while, my dad was stationed at Naval Air Station Alameda in the San Francisco Bay Area, where the aircraft carriers used to be parked. They may have brought them back. So I spent uh, early years, late 60s, early 70s in Daly City, which is right next to San Francisco. And then after a while, about 74 time frame, we moved to San Jose, California, 50 miles further south, the South Bay so-called. And because my dad was transferred to Naval Air Station Moffett Field, which when you're driving along the highway there, the freeway, Highway 17, if memory serves, you see these huge hangars there. That's where they used to store the the blimps that the Navy used to fly ways back. These big dirigibles. According to some of Leonard Stringfield's sources, they actually kept the recovered alien craft there at one point. But and I was there for the formative development years of what became Silicon Valley, because right there around Naval Air Station Moffett, which is now a federal airfield, they have NASA's Ames research facility right there at the airfield. They have um, the Blue Cube, which is the satellite tracking facility for the NSA and the NRO. They have Lockheed Missile and Space Division, which is a very spooky place. So all of that was at the northern part of what became the Silicon Valley. South of that, where I lived and where I worked, I worked in the silicon industry, the semiconductor industry when I was younger. So I saw San Jose go from a place of almost nothing but orchards. It was known as like the orchard capital of America at one point. Luther Burbank did a lot of his genetic experiments with fruits and crossbreeding and hybridization of fruits, what have you. It was in that locale, and then out of that grew this huge agricultural industry, and that was gradually supplanted over time. Kind of sad, actually, from orchards to the silicon industry and its associated pollution and everything. I remember clearly, the creeks would be full of tadpoles and frogs and toads before too long because of all the pollution pumped into the canals and the creeks. They all went extinct, right? Pretty much. So yeah, I watched San Jose in particular, the South Bay, just change over the years. So that's where I'm from, and that's why I sound the way I do. And the last few years, before I went to Australia, I was living in Arizona in the Bullhead City, Kingman area. So I'm familiar with that area and had some interesting experiences there as well.
Well, you've had so many interesting things happen to you in your life, and you've detailed these stories, you've documented them in detail on other podcasts, and people can find those. I wanted to talk to you about today about dragons, and I wanted to talk to you about white powder gold. And as an intro to dragons, now most people in the West, at least, believe that dragons are creatures that live only in fairy tales. Would you say that this is correct?
Well, they've become pretty much, I don't know if extinct is the correct word. I believe that at one point the dragons existed here, just like other creatures. I mean, we now have this whole cryptid zoology field and have had it for some time, where people investigate reports of lake monsters, so-called, like Champ in Lake Champlain, Nessie the uh, in Loch Ness, Scotland, et cetera, and other places around the world. And there are a variety of different kind of cryptids. There are winged cryptids. Have been numerous sightings over the years of what appear to be pteranodons, right? These large winged dinosaurs, essentially. So they're not only cryptids are not only of the big hairy hominoid variety that we're familiar with, Sasquatch and what have you, or Dogman, this large canine wolf-like upright bipedal creature. But the stories about the dragons goes back into antiquity. And what's interesting is in the Chinese calendar, uh, it's a cyclical 12-year calendar, as you know. Every every animal represented in the Chinese zodiac is a real animal, right? And so clearly they regard the dragon. I was born in the year of the dragon. I'm a wood dragon, 1964, Scorpio. So to the Chinese, their scheme of things, their cosmology, dragons are very real things. And we also see in the West the the same view pertains. In many heralds, crest, banners of the kings and queens, dukes, and various lords, they frequently had a banner depicting a dragon. Of course, we have the story of Saint George, and slaying the dragon, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe that they existed at one point because of whatever. Now, I have a different view of that because I was working with a team of German psychics for a period of time, and the gal who was our main mystic, our main seer, if you will, she had that gift of etheric third eye vision, of second sight. And every week we'd meet on Skype, and it was me. I was the only American English speaking person, and the Germans, and there was only two or three Germans that spoke English. So two of them were the main interpreters. The gal who was the mystic, the seer, she only spoke in German, but everything she said was translated into English for me. And what we used to do is do healings for each other, energy work for each other, what have you. And then whatever came into the etheric field of vision for the seer, she would report back to the rest of us on Skype what she was seeing, what should we do about it, et cetera, et cetera. And make a long story short, on one occasion, these dragons showed up, right? And she said, "Well, there are some dragons here, and they just wanted to talk to us. And if it's okay with all of you, I will find out what this dragon or dragons want, right?" So she telepathically communicated with them. And then the story that came back was very interesting. These dragons that appeared wanted us to remove these ethereal, interdimensional snake entities that had embedded themselves into these dragons, right? And effectively took them over and used the dragons as host. And the short history that came back to us through our seer and translated back to me was that these dragons were just normal, for the most part, earthly beings. Some had an interdimensional capability. They knew where the portal entries were, could fly in and out, uh, ingress and egress in and out of our realm and to other realms. Some of the dragons were pretty much purely physical, didn't have that capability. So when these snake entities, and I've heard about these snake entities embedding themselves in other beings too, in humans and reptilians and other creatures, these snake entities embedded themselves into these dragons, took them over, and then used them for malign purposes. Burning the crops of the villagers, attacking villagers, destroying villages. So eventually, humanity in certain areas that were affected in this way banded together, and they pretty much hunted. And I'm sure they had more than just, uh, you know, slingshots, catapults, edged weapons. I'm sure they use some degree of advanced technology, know-how, mysticism, whatever the case may be. The long and the short of it is they pretty much hunted the the physical dragons into extinction. The ones that had the means to escape interdimensionally or by altering their their resonant frequency to get out of our phase of reality, they did so. And they still exist. But they were still carrying these snake entities around. So together we pooled our resources energetically, psychically, and we extracted these snake entities out of these dragons. And then the dragons were so happy, they began doing cartwheels, spinning around, just in a state of ecstasy, joy, because they finally had divested themselves with our help from these snake entities that had taken them over. And again, I point out that these snake entities compelled, according to these dragons, compelled these dragons in the past to do things they normally wouldn't do. And humanity, I mean, to this day, humanity is quite stupid and superstitious, and the fear of the unknown and all that. So when these dragons were perpetrating all of these dragon-like crimes, the common sense, I guess, view prevailed. Let's just get rid of them, right? But they didn't realize that these dragons were hosts, were being manipulated, were being used against their will. So, hence a lot of them were physically rendered extinct. The ones that had the interdimensional capability escaped, but they wanted, at least this group wanted us to extract the snake entities. We did, and they started celebrating, doing cartwheels, spinning around. It was quite an emotional moment because the Germans, I mean, I had the headphones on, I'm listening, and they all started weeping and crying, and I go, well, what's going on, And they came back to me that they're celebrating, they're spinning around, they're doing cartwheels, they're so happy that we extracted these snake entities. And what was interesting was, Jock, 2 weeks later, our seer, our mystic, says, there's a reptilian, right? He's been watching us. He was watching us last week. He didn't say anything. He was just observing us. Should I ask him what he wants, right? And she didn't detect any threat from this reptilian. We said, sure, go ahead. And she communicated with this reptilian. And then what came back was, well, we saw what you did with the dragons. Can you do the same for us? For me, can you remove the snake entity from me so I can live on my life? I can continue my spiritual journey, right? I can progress. So we did. We pulled our resources together, extracted the snake entity, and then the reptilian went on its way. And then we turned to other matters because we would have like a schedule. Okay, this week we're going to work on energy work for James. We're going to do energy work for so and so. All the challenges that so and so is going through, we're going to help him or her out, right? So that's what we were really all about. Was just like it was a healing kind of group that we were part of, and then suddenly these beings start showing up. So we don't think nothing of it. We move on to other matters. A week later, because we kept meeting on weekends, our seer, our mystic says, well, now there are several reptilians here. Okay. Do you want me to ask them what they want? And we go, sure, see what they're all about, right? And it came back, well, they would like us to extract these snake entities, right? So that's what we did. There were several reptilians. We extracted the snake entities out of them. They were happy. They went their separate way. Now, point of relevance is that I had no, I didn't interview him. He was one of my consult, right? This guy that was one of the leaders of the Southern California rave movement, and this is when raves are really big, if you remember. Um, and I knew another guy that was really big in the Southern California rave movement, and he told me similar things about the ET alien archontic control of the whole rave movement, everything down to the music, to the drugs, to the attaching entities. And the attaching entities, according to this one of my consults, wasn't just grays and other entities that jumped in and out of people, when they were all high on ecstasy or whatever. He said he sees because when he's on these drugs like ecstasy, it opens up his third eye vision. He's able to see into the etheric realm, right? Realms. And what he perceived, completely independent from what the work I was doing with the Germans, He said what he sees is these snake entities that embed themselves in the abdomens, in the midriff of people, especially at these raves. And he said the more energy, the more loosh that was exuded by the ravers at these events, the bigger and bigger these snake entities would become. And he said that he observed himself that he would see these snake entities hovering over a group of ravers, flopping around, dancing on the dance floor, whatever, or in the field wherever the rave happened to be. And he said the the loosh thereby generated from all these ravers was going up into the snake entity and getting bigger and bigger. And the entity was getting bigger and bigger. He told me that in some of his visions, in some of his um, mystic third eye visions and what he's perceived, he said some of these snake entities get so big they can literally just be as big as the New York skyline, New York City skyline, just absorbing all that loosh, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And then you have these images of the Ouroboros, of the snake entity, just biting onto its own tail, surrounding the planet Earth, as a visual motif. Think about that. And so all this was in the back of my mind. And then later I worked with the Germans to extract these snake entities. I go, wow, these snake entities, they must be real players in this because they're embedding themselves into dragons, they're embedding themselves into reptilians. And also, when people are on ayahuasca, what do they frequently see? They see these snake entities all over the place, right? So anyway, to answer your question, I absolutely believe dragons are real because I'd helped to extract these snake entities out of them. Uh, I've had my own interesting stories that came up in these Skype sessions with the German psychics about dragons, and off air I'll relate that to you as well. But long and the short of it, I'm satisfied that dragons are real. They may make a comeback, and I like to think that I'm not saying that these dragons that we help owe us anything, right? Because there was some kind of karmic payback at work where we humans were helping to extract these snake entities out of these dragons, and how the dragons have been vilified all this time in myth and lore because of these snake entities that took them over. And we see an analog of this, Jock, in everyday life where people get taken up as hosts by archontic, demonic, alien entities, if you will, and they're compelled to do things that normally they wouldn't do, right? So we know those kinds of things happen. And it also happened to dragons in the past. So if there's anything that we could do, and I'm glad to be that we're having this discussion, to kind of, set the record straight that these dragons didn't do this of their own accord, that they were taken up as hosts and they were made to do things they normally wouldn't do. So long and the short of it, that's my experience with dragons.
Well, I think that maybe as a recap for people who are new to the idea that dragons might be real and not just fairy tale creatures, we could say that what you're saying is that dragons are real. They are interdimensional creatures. They have the ability to move through dimensions. And another word for dimensions is densities, and that just means a frequency range. So the frequency range that we're used to here in what some people call 3D or the third dimension, third density, is a certain range of frequencies that we think of as all there is, but that's not the case. There, there are many other densities or realms, as you call it, and I really like that word realm, and I use that word too to talk about these places. Um, Even though these places might be the same place where we are, it's just that we can't see what's happening because we are not able to perceive these frequency realms normally. Some people can. Um, Now, another thing that you mentioned was the ether and how you were tapping into an etheric realm. And I think that this is super key for people to understand that the ether is real. Academia has discarded the ether. They just got rid of it. James Clerk Maxwell created Maxwell's equations that included the ether, and Nikola Tesla was a big fan of these equations. And then Oliver Heaviside came along and simplified those equations, discarded the ether from the equations, and then academia, controlled by dark forces, said Oliver Heaviside's version, the simplified version of James Clerk Maxwell's equations that talk about the electromagnetic nature of light, were the correct equations. These are our authority now about, and so there is no ether, and it's just a void out there. Well, this is the problem, I think, for science, for us to think that there is no ether, that there is therefore no Akashic records, no eternal virtual library of all that is, that there is no power source out there for creating matter, because the ether is the quarry for all matter. And Tesla told us that we would build planets from the ether one day when we learned how to extract material from the ether. So even though it's invisible, it exists. Just like even though dragons can be invisible and they can go to a different realm or different frequency range, they exist. And this is what you're telling us.
Yes, and one quick point about the dragons, and then we'll segue into the issue about the ether. There's also the issue of the dragon lines, ley lines around the planet, and also the issue of the dragon bloodlines, because I'm satisfied that some of that dragon DNA, some of that dragon bloodline, that morphic resonance field that Rupert Sheldrake talks about, exists within certain bloodlines here on the planet, for good and for bad. And what I said about the dragons being taken up as hosts, that does not preclude the possibility that some dragons may have been of the more malevolent, malign variety, right? That's always a possibility. But at any rate, that DNA and the morphic resonance field information had, had somehow been extracted from real dragons and imbued in certain bloodlines. So the bloodlines that we're talking about not only contain reptilian or Draco DNA, but in some cases dragon DNA. And this goes back to ancient China, goes back to ancient Europe, so and Turkey and other places. So getting back to the ether, from what I understand, I probably haven't done as much research as you have in this field, Jock, but even Clerk Maxwell's equations were altered. There were like it was more multifaceted. There were other aspects to it that had first they chipped away at that, and then they did away with the whole concept of the ether altogether. And then if you go back in time, this is where the twain meet. If you go back to ancient Egyptian Comedian, high magic, and other traditions, science, if you will, or what passed for modern science at the time, especially the occulted hidden science, which had been passed down through to initiates since Atlantean times and before, took the ether for granted. It was the medium of the ether, is what it was often referred to. It was a way to plug into an information field, but also to access different points in time and space. And so, what we have in old Europe, pre the Rockefeller Rothschild takeover of the science field, was this basic understanding that the ether was real. And with an understanding of the ether, as Tesla pointed out, we would be able to unlock all the secrets of time and space. And so, what have they done since then, Jock? They've replaced the concept of the ether. And every time someone has an astral experience, and I've had many, we're traveling through the medium of the ether in one form or another, whether it's a lower astral plane, a higher astral plane, and sometimes of our own volition and seemingly uh, without even making an effort. And there must be some energetic causal factors, astronomical alignments, whatever the case may be, that facilitate this process at times. But sometimes when we go dreaming, we go dimension hopping. We go to alternate realities, we go to future timelines, we go into the past, because there is really no past, present, future. They're all just various aspects of the same thing, right? And different ETs and different sources, non-human sources, have told this to humans over time, over to initiates and to people that have the mystic third eye vision and ability, the clairaudient ability to communicate with beings that are not malevolent, not deceptive. And there are plenty of those that have given valid information over the years. Tesla himself said that he was getting information from some non-human sources, and he even mentioned Mars, if memory serves, that there seems to be some kind of intelligence source that came from there. Carl Jung, not many people realize it, but he had like one or more of these spirit guides that only he could see, that gave him all kinds of information. So the point being is that we go from this understanding of the medium of the ether, and there was a point in time when science and mysticism were two sides of the same coin. They operated on the basis of the ether being real, and all the science, all the ceremonial rites, uh, all the technology was based on an understanding of the reality of the ether and its many potentialities. So we go from there to this reductionist kind of uh, empirical science-based model where everything has to be broken down into particles, subparticles, atomic, subatomic. They're starting to go in the right direction, talking about when this started with Heisenberg and others with the quantum mechanics. David Bohm talks about this, the implicate order, how that there's this hidden reality unseen for the most part by most people without the etheric third eye vision, but which is the stabilizing force which holds together essentially this 3D five sense illusion that we see around us, that there's a hidden implicate order. So there's a number of physicists, a number of theorists that have gone in direction back to the ether. But this model of reductionism, everything has to be reduced to a particle, a subatomic particle, et cetera, that has held sway for a long time now, and it's really led the human race to the brink of extinction, essentially, because they're using the wrong scientific models. They're creating weapons of mass destruction instead of doing things that provide free energy, so-called, and a way to make our lives easier and better. They've taken this other model and then they've run with it, and this is why uh, there were initial problems with the deep black UFO alien technology back engineering programs because I think David Adair was one of the ones who said this. He, as a young child prodigy, he was taken to Area 51, shown alien technology. He came onto the radar because he was doing, back in the day, you remember that they used to have these science fairs and science exhibitions, and kids of all ages would be encouraged to show up with their particular invention or whatever the case may be. And he developed things, David Adair did as a boy, that caught the eye of these people, including General Curtis LeMay, if memory serves, who had a deep involvement in the UFO alien back engineering programs, right? And David Adair made the point that from what he's since come to understand about the deep black uh, back engineering programs with alien technology, they try as much as possible not to recruit scientists or students, physics students, who have been overly indoctrinated in the reductionist non-ether model, because he says they have problems with those people. They come into the program, they can't keep up. Everything they're learning conflicts with all the nonsense they were taught in the school. So they become useless, and then they become a security risk. Then they have to be dealt with in that fashion, right? Either intimidate them into silence or do, some other extreme means to get them to shut up because they've been read into an aspect of the program. They can't function in it because their science is all wrong, right? So, I mean, that's precisely why my understanding of why Edward Teller specifically recruited Bob Lazar into the program at S4 was precisely because Lazar had this out of the box left field way of thinking. He didn't think like a lot of the physicists of the time. He was kind of uh, more open-minded, right? And so we need that in order to learn or relearn everything we can about the medium of the ether. And if you look at how uh, the technology that Lazar describes, how a super heavy element, element 115, which the Russians have recently synthesized, element 115 in the lab, but according to Lazar, I have no reason to doubt him. Element 115, as he dubbed it, is naturally occurring in other star systems, particularly in the binary Zeta Reticuli star system. There are forces at work at the creation of those star systems, which created naturally occurring processes, which created elements that are abundant in those star systems that are non-existent in ours. So element 115 was that particular element, became a fuel for a gravity amplifying drive system. So basically, what they do is they use the element 115 to power up these gravity amplifiers. They point the gravity amplifiers at a distant point in space, pull that distant point in space towards them, turn off the mechanism, and voila, they're there. There's no linear travel at or near or exceeding the speed of light. Got nothing to do with linear travel, at least this mode of transportation. They simply, like in Star Trek terms, rather, they warp space and time and pull a distant part of space towards them. Then they deactivate it, and they're there in that distant point in space, and they use other means of propulsion to travel around that particular star system. So to me, that smacks of an understanding, at least on the aliens' part, right, of the ether and how uh, everything is all connected. And then another interesting thing which ties into this, I keep mispronouncing the guy's name, Tom Kelleher, but he was a aerospace consultant with NASA, and he was a member of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. He interviewed the late Ben Rich, who was the former director of Lockheed Skunk Works. And they got into a discussion about alien technology, UFOs, the back engineering of the same, et cetera, et cetera. And Kelleher asked Ben Rich how the propulsion, navigation, et cetera, works. And then Ben Rich answered his question with a question of his own. He goes, Tom Kelleher, how does ESP work? Right? Kelleher responded, all time and space is one. And then Ben Rich said, yes, exactly. That's how it works. And he went on to say that there were problems with the equations. And I can only infer that the equations he's talking about are Einstein's general theory of relativity and similar models based on that. He said there was a problem with the equations. We corrected them, and now we travel the stars. Now we can bring ET home. Now the military is traveling the stars. Now, those are profound statements coming from a guy who absolutely had access and need to know about recovered alien technology. He was the director of Skunk Works, and Skunk Works, I would suggest, was not the only deep black advanced aerospace uh, division in the black aerospace world. There were probably other skunk works from the other major corporations, Northrop, et cetera, et cetera. There was probably similar outfits, right? So, point being is that Ben Rich's response, all time and space is one, definitely connected with ESP, the old term, extrasensory perception, and that it has everything to do with the propulsion, the guidance system, the navigation, and the interplay between the occupants, the crew, the pilots, if you will, and the craft itself, right? So it's clear to me that these aliens, for lack of a better term, and probably the advanced civilizations on Earth prior to the flood and prior to the last series of celestially driven cataclysms, they had an understanding of the ether. And also, I would suggest that these very dark, sinister, uh, magically oriented, let's say, cults, they have an understanding of the ether too. So in these hidden cloistered groups, and you go back in time, they had different names, different variations, the Golden Dawn, uh, these different mystical organizations, they had an understanding of the ether as well. But unfortunately, because of the malign influence of big money in the form of these Rockefeller Ford Foundation type grants, is just as history has been changed and repurposed, we see the exact same thing with the science field, where everything has been replaced. Instead of abundance, everything is replaced with scarcity models. We have nonsensical designations like fossil fuel. It's there must have been an enormous amount of like dinosaur era plant matter in order to come up with all this oil, right? And then we find out later when you really study how oil is produced within the bowels of the earth, it's a naturally occurring process. Oil is created, as we understand it, petroleum products are created in the bowels of the earth through some kind of natural process. And there's a lot of it. There's no scarcity involved. The Russians always strike oil because they go very, very deep, right? And a quick point that I'll leave it at this. One of the reasons why for decades there was a stigma attached to the study of or investigations into crashed alien craft uh, was because of the smear campaign meted out to a guy named Silas Dean. Silas Dean was one of the sources for the 1948 March 1948 Aztec, New Mexico crash retrieval of a flying saucer had a number of alien bodies inside of it. And the craft was recovered intact. Such notables as J. Robert Oppenheimer and others actually boarded this craft. And uh, Silas Dean was the subject of a major smear campaign because even before the Aztec crash, he was an entrepreneur and a technician in the oil industry field. He developed methods that almost guaranteed that he and his sponsors would strike oil every time. And this went against the wishes, of course, of the Seven Sisters, the majors, in the oil industry, right? So they already hated Silas Dean to begin with because he kept going everywhere. And, despite what all the expert geologists for all these major oil companies were saying, he was going around just extracting oil all over the place. So he was already on the top and the bottom of their hate list. So later on, through his sources, Silas Dean gets to know some of the actual scientists and engineers involved in the recovery and the analysis of the craft that was recovered in Aztec, New Mexico, March 1948. It was very easy for the media to go after Silas Dean because they hated him anyway. And then they just labeled him a fraudster. Aztec was a hoax, and that was a stigma that carried on for decades. For decades after that, serious so-called UFO researchers shied away from any stories of the recovery of alien craft because they didn't want to be tarred with the same brush that Silas Dean did, you see, to the point where even the great Leonard Stringfield, who was the godfather of all alien crash retrieval research efforts, even he dismissed Aztec as a hoax. And then only later, much to his credit, he said, mea culpa. I may have been a little too hasty in my conclusions about Aztec. Now, based on new information, I think there was something to it. Okay. So, point being is that they already hated Silas Dean because of his ability to extract oil. They already hated him because, uh, of all the problems he caused for the oil industry. So when he came up with these sources that were involved in the Aztec crash, and nothing will make the oil industry, petrochemical industry, wobble like jello than the notion that there exists technology that doesn't require petroleum products, that doesn't require, uh, you know, the normal means of energy production, right? Overnight, if the truth came out about alien technology in the hands of these aerospace corporations, that would have a severe impact, not only on religion, but have a severe impact on the economy. Because overnight, the stocks for the petrochemical industry are going to take a beating if the truth came out about this technology. That's why there's such a huge pushback now where all these people that in Congress and elsewhere that want to get into the alien truth, especially as it relates to alien technology and recovered alien technology, they're getting a serious backlash now. They're getting a serious pushback. That's exactly what I expected because the the access and control of alien technology is the fundamental basis that holds this whole paradigm of scarcity, of control, everything. It comes under all of that. And the need to keep secrecy is such in these deep black aerospace programs involving alien technology. They will stop at nothing. They've assassinated presidents, John F. Kennedy. They assassinated the Secretary of Defense, uh, James Forrestal, and a whole bevy of other people, including a number of researchers, because this all ties in with the ether. This all ties in with what's been euphemistically referred to in some terms as the new physics. but really it's the old physics of the ether, um, you know, understandings. Anyway, I hope I answered your question.
What you just said, yeah, 100%. It is the old wisdom of the ether, the fabric of the universe. It's invisible to us. And so today's science says because it's invisible, it doesn't exist. Oh, okay. Does Wi-Fi not exist? So if you go into academia to learn something in the sciences, young men and women, you are subjecting yourself to nonsense. It's total, utter nonsense in the Rockefeller-controlled academic system in the sciences in the US and Rothschild-controlled in Europe. And all the other countries take their cues from the US and from Europe. So the Rothschilds have completely cracked down on anything sensible in the sciences, especially in astrophysics, especially in physics, and we have to be outside of academia, as you suggested. We have to be out of the box, like Bob Lazar, to have a sensible perspective on our world. Now, what's interesting is that Bob Lazar was tasked, he and his team, his small team, they were tasked with discovering what the heck this power source was that they were given, and they couldn't figure it out. Even though Bob Lazar was out of the box, even so, the races that are making these machines, maybe they're life hybrid machines, where they're organisms, spacecraft that are partially organisms and partially machines, something like that. They're so advanced that Bob Lazar, this super smart guy out of the box, couldn't he couldn't figure out how it worked. And to this day, he doesn't know how it worked. But this element you're talking about, element 115, I think you mentioned, I guess that's the key to a lot of mysteries, when we're talking about space travel by advanced races. Now, a lot of people hearing this for the first time, hearing you talk, might say, well, he's saying dragons exist. He must be crazy. He's saying that extraterrestrials exist. He must be crazy. He's saying that advanced spacecraft that can go from one place to another through something called the ether exists, and that isn't that a medieval term that everyone just gave up on because it's nonsense? Well, please stick with us and do your own research, because your discernment is smarter than academia's hammer that's coming down on your head every day in class. So use your discernment. By the way, as far as the ether goes, I think that each of us has the ability to tap into the ether, but we're attacked so often daily, even in our sleep, that we can't, we're on the defense against archontic entities, as you call them, dark entities who are coming for our energy because they need us to live. They need our energy to live. So they're using us as parasites. And so we're defending ourselves against them. We're distracted every day, and we don't have the practice of tapping into our ability to reach the ether and to gain wisdom from the ether. What do you think about that?
I agree. And associated with the ether physics is an understanding of the plasma electric nature of the universe, because we have these bogus models. And I encourage your listeners to, your viewers to watch and read up on Professor James McCanney's work about the electric universe and action from a distance, et cetera, et cetera. He's done a lot of research into Planet X or Planet X type object, these large rogue planet size or larger astronomical bodies that come into our solar system and cause all these problems. That doesn't have to be an impact event, because, think of the solar system as a big capacitor, right? The the sun is an electrodynamic dynamo constantly blowing out um, particles charged one way or the other. It's a big uh, what's the term? It's a big electric field that we're in, right? And so if we look at the plasma physics in the labs, what the plasma looked like, and then we step back with a zoomed out perspective on the cosmos, we see the same thing, because uh, plasma, the plasma electric model is scale invariant. What you see in the plasma physics labs is what you see in space. as far as stellar formation, galactic formation. Study the work of Hannes Alfvén. There's a lot of other people out there. The Thunderbolts project with David Talbot, et cetera, et cetera. So even the basic model of the sun and stars being um, fusion reactors is wrong, and that is a basic astronomical model, right? So even that, even the basis of their modeling of how stars are formed, I mean, it's just miracle based on miracle, right? Just you have this agglomeration of helium and other elements. Somehow they all get together in one place, and then like a miracle happens. The pressure is such that there's ignition, and then stellar formation. It just one, and it's all based on once again on mathematical equations, because the mathematicians over time had taken over physics, with their highfalutin equations, and they don't necessarily match what's being seen in the labs, what the experimentalists are actually seeing. We're seeing like this divergence, right? So even the basic models of stellar formation, galactic formation are all wrong because we live in a plasma electric universe. These stars are dynamos, they're plasma electric dynamos. They're not fusion reactors like the hydrogen fusion reactors that the astrophysicists say they are. So there's something fundamentally wrong with even that process. But one of the reasons why is because, as you pointed out, there is an infinite amount of energy that can be tapped into. Anyone who practices self-energization techniques, anyone who practices certain meditative techniques, they can draw in this energy. They can draw in this power. I mean, you look at some of these yogis, and you look at some of these shaman and male and female shamans, and the abilities that they have. Yes, it took a lot of discipline for them to get to that stage where they can perform these metaphysical feats, right? Someone take the time to read uh, the book about Black Elk, the second Black Elk in particular. There was two of them. Um, the one who came later, the one who was this object of study through anthropology and other things, he was able to do all kinds of things that were witnessed by skeptical people. And then you look at the work of the late intertribal medicine man, Rolling Thunder. I mean, many eyewitnesses have seen him call lightning down from the sky and just create massive electrical thunderstorms uh, just by doing some kind of a rain dance. So clearly, there's something being done in these ceremonies, in these practices that's tickling the ether, that's doing something to create this flux or this change in the theater in the medium of the ether, which can then be accessed, exploited, and expanded upon, right? So point being is that if these guys can do it, and I certainly don't have that level of discipline where I could, you know, and that's one of the problems too, because humanity, especially in the West, if you look at the diets of humanity, it's all about the term you used earlier of densities. It's all about densifying the corpus, the human body, with processed foods, with GMO, et cetera, and make us like a happy hunting ground for all these marauding archontic, largely, not always though, but largely unseen beings, because we lack the ability to see into other dimensions and into the ether, like even some quadruped animals have the means, dogs, cats, they can, see into the other realms, for whatever reason, and a lot of variety of reasons. Humans, by and large, have lost that ability, right? And so we are subject to all these unseen forces. They're there. And again, we get back to that empirical reductionist viewpoint, which pertains in science. If you can't hold it, if you can't quantify it, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, right? But they've proven when a person dies, they suddenly have a weight loss of X number of grams of mass suddenly vacates. And I know people that worked in palliative care that had the second sight, the etheric vision, They've been walking down the corridor and they look into a wardroom and they see the spirit leaving the newly deceased body, right? So they know that there's a causal connection between life, the life force, and when the life force exits the physical body, there's a um, there's a pronounced weight loss, right? So something has vacated, and you see all the excuses that these empiricists and these people excreted by the medical community, which is just don't even get me started down that road. But the excuses they come up with for near-death experiences, oh, that's a function of the anesthesia. They had a hallucination. Well, yeah, but why were they hovering over their own body, looking down at their own body on the gurney, and they can relate word for word, what all of you people, doctors and nurses, were saying. And how come they can know exactly what their loved ones were saying and feeling in the waiting room outside? It's because they were momentarily lifted, if you will, beyond the limitations of our 3D 5 sense prison. And that's what it is. It's a 5 sense prison where we're told that if you can't see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, it's not real. And meanwhile, we're being assailed on all sides by these invisible entities. And the irony is that these adepts, these warlocks, these maguses, these high priests, they know these entities exist. In fact, they work with them. They work with them, they work through them, and they allow these entities to work through them physically, take them up as hosts even in order to enhance their power. So we have segments of society that have radically different understanding of physics, mainstream physics, and a radically different understanding of life itself. The masses are this ignorant kind of, there's no proof for aliens, there's no proof of this, there's no proof of that. That's a lot of that is fear-based, quite frankly. And that tracks back to these old superstitions and old dogmas foisted upon them by the church, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a holdover. They'll never admit it, right? But it's still a holdover from that. This is why a lot of the Christian Zionists out there, uh, people like Alex Jones and others, people like that, they're just finally been revealed for what they really are. That they held these people in reserve until the time was right where they can be these alien debunkers, right? Like we need more of them, right? So suddenly all these people that pass themselves off as experts in the surface level conspiracy, the 5 sense conspiracy, by the way, as David Icke would call it, suddenly they're popping up out of the woodwork and saying aliens don't exist, alien bodies were never recovered, alien craft were never recovered. Those are statements made out of sheer ignorance. The information is all there. It's been there for people that want to go in that direction. See, my background, I'm a student of military history. So when I start coming across these names, General Hoyt Vandenberg, General Nathan Twining, General Curtis LeMay, deeply involved in the analysis and recovery of alien technology, that makes me sit up and go, whoa, I read about those guys. They were big shots in World War II. Now, turns out that they were deeply involved in the analysis of recovered alien technology. Okay, that should make everyone sit up and take notice. Because why is it that this information is relegated to, those cleared, access granted on a need to know basis? Shouldn't the entire human race know about this? Isn't it our right to know where we came from, how we came to be here, right? And you look at the malign influence of the schools now, where college age students can't even tell you what the state capital is where they live. They can't even tell you they can't even name you one of the founding fathers other to say that they were a slave owning racist, right? So that was just X number of decades of Rockefeller education, Rockefeller medicine, Rockefeller scientists. So now you have these emotionally overwrought, uh, stunted emotional growth crybabies, as they're being used as shock troops in order to shut down discussion, shut down debate, and they're everywhere now, right? Screaming about white privilege, screaming about racism, right? If they really feel that way about it, stop driving cars because white people invented cars. Stop flying in planes. Stop doing anything that smacks of civilization and advancement. go back to living this pre-industrial, urchin type of life, right? But they won't do that because they're in nature, they're Luciferian, communist, socialist, whether they realize it or not. They're useful idiots. Point being is that that's where we come from. You further you go back in time, there's an understanding between mysticism and science being two sides of the same coin, understanding of ether physics, an understanding of that time and space is all one. There is not really past, present, and future. They all kind of run parallel and they intermingle at key juncture points, right? So it's not so much like a past life, it's a parallel life. You have a version of yourself, Jock, that's coexisting right now in a frequency out of phase of this one. You have life, you have families, you have vocations, you're on a quest to do something, right? And we are the sum of all of our parts. So there are a number of versions of us coexisting right now. And I think part of our challenge is to reacquire and reintegrate the best of ourselves from all these different aspects of our past, present, and future, right? The way that these shamans and these medicine men, medicine women have an understanding of who they are. Uh, they're not just a fractal of themselves. In other words, they strive to be at total unity, total integration, and be able in the process to work through all that trauma that's been amassed over these many lifetimes, right? So I know I'm kind of diverging from what you suggested, but that's the way I feel about this, that the malign nature of the indoctrination is such that there are so many useful idiots out there that are doing their level best, whether they realize it or not, to destroy civilization, right? We're carbon-based life forms, and all we hear about is how we got to eradicate carbon. And then you look at the historical record, you look at the geological record, you look at the absolute evidence that gigantic flora and fauna existed on this planet. You look at all the what passes for plateaus and mountaintops and buttes, which are really nothing more than gigantic trees that someone or something it cut off at the base, right? You have these gigantic tree stumps all over the world that people think are just mountains or mountaintops or plateaus when they were really giant trees. Now, how do they get so large? It's because the carbon dioxide content was so much greater in the old days. Everything grew at a fantastic pace. Even the animals were large. Even animals and life forms that we think of as being small in our reality, relatively small, scorpions and other kinds of animals, crustaceans, what have you, they were large, extremely large in paleo ancient times, right? So we need to recover a lot of this lost history. There used to be a very large planet in our solar system that was blown up as a result of an interplanetary war, which resulted in our asteroid belt. If one follows Boda's law, there is a large planet missing in our solar system. In its place is this asteroid belt. How did the asteroid belt get there, right? So there are so many aspects of our history that have been kept from us. The reality of advanced civilizations in the past that were spacefaring civilizations that interacted on a daily basis with non-human, if you will, alien life forms, and the fact that there are a number of civilizations that advanced civilizations that live underground, live under the ocean still to this day. So we need to really get our heads straight as far as recognizing that our past and our history was stolen from us, reacquiring that information, and also an understanding of our intimate connection with the ether, our intimate connection with the information field. Every one of us has the means to tap or plug into that if we're willing to do what it takes. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, Jock.
But that was amazing. That was amazing. See, this is why I wanted to have you on because you can you're like a racehorse out of the gate. You just start going. I mean, we started at 5:30 in the morning in Australia time, and you're ready to go. You could go for probably 5 hours and then you'd have to take a drink of water. So this is
I was
fantastic.
just looking around for my cup.
I
Thought I
just
brought a cup of water in here.
speaking of water, cheers. But yeah, I wanted to reiterate for people some things about what you said in the last few minutes, and that was one is that when you're talking about oil not being fossil fuels, not being decaying plants and dead dinosaurs, but something else, if they research the term abiotic oil,
Yes.
they will find the Russian research that is copious and that goes into how deep they actually found oil and is way below the level that any kind of decaying plant matter or dead dinosaurs could have been. So we know that it's a chemical and mechanical process that the Earth, as you say, naturally produces. The oil is produced by Terra herself, and we don't necessarily know why, but this is the fact. Academic science. See, the Russian research on oil is outside of academia. So academia does not allow real research in. It just keeps it out. Same with the Big Bang. They promulgate this Big Bang nonsense to tell us that we have a finite, a very short amount of time for anything to happen in the universe. 13.8 billion years is nothing. The truth is that we have no Big Bang because obviously everything didn't come from nothing. You idiots in academia who keep saying this. Yes, everything came from nothing. Okay, on the face of it, that's nonsense from any possible perspective. And so anyone who researches the Big Bang will find that the best intel is outside of academia. They will not allow in the good science on our either universe of infinite time, or as Alex Collier says, he's an Andromedan contactee. He says that they say that our universe, our particular universe of many universes, is 21 trillion years old. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good for a nice uh, bit of time for races to advance technologically, far beyond what we could possibly do in our small time on this planet. Um, and there were so many things that I was thinking of when you were talking that have now escaped me, but but I'm so glad that you were able to give us that run. Now I want to zip right into something called monoatomic elements. Now Wikipedia, uh, people will find, suppresses information on monatomic elements. And so you will not find any mention of monatomic gold on Wikipedia except as a fictional uh, entity or as a hypothetical entity. And there's three mentions, either fictional or hypothetical, but it's not regarded as real as far as Wikipedia is concerned. As far as the other monatomic elements, they have a short list of some of the monatomic elements, minerals I'm talking about, but they don't give any information on them, and they leave out some of the key monatomic minerals, is even on the list. So it's a control system because these are astonishing elements. Now, David Radius Hudson, who is also missing from Wikipedia, even though he's put millions of dollars into the research of white powder gold because he found it on his land. So he's redoing the research that needed to be done to find out about this magic, amazing element that the ancients have been using. Now, he discovered that it becomes a superconducting element in certain conditions. So white powder gold is just a form of gold that exists that we don't normally see. In the Bible, it's referenced as manna, although academia will tell you that it's a scale insect secretion and not white powder gold that precipitates on the desert in the cool of the morning, and that then can feed people because it is this astounding element that has incredible nutritive properties that gives us the ability to access the ether, I think. And I think that monatomic elements in general help us. And I mean, I use cacao as a writer, and cacao has monatomic gold and other monatomic elements in it from the beautiful soil in Peru. I use that to connect to the muse, I call it, to write my screenplays, my fairy tales about dragons, and other things that I thought were just mythological creatures for my whole life until a couple of years ago. I started talking to Abby Lynn and Vanessa Lyle and Margie Kay, and they all said, "No, dragons are real. We just can't see them." And then you come along and you say, "Yeah, they're real. I've telepathically communicated with them to help them remove snake entities." So it's beyond just saying, yeah, they're real because I think so. No, you've talked to them, you've worked with them, they've come to you because you have the power as a human who we thought we were just little slaves, little old me, who could do nothing except make slave wages and then fall asleep exhausted every night. But no, you as a human being have this incredible power that the dragons come to you for. It's amazing.
Yeah, yes, it is. And just to interject for a moment, one line of monatomic gold research. I'm sure you're familiar with the term ORMUS, orbitally rearranged monatomic elements or substances or whatever the last part there is. And it has to do with monatomic elements. And there's not only this um, metaphysical aspect to it, there are there are like tunneling kind of aspects to it, which enable the ORMUS, the monatomic uh, elements, to essentially tunnel or bore into, for lack of a better term, other aspects of space-time, other aspects of reality. Nowadays, these physicists are like porting themselves in all kinds of positions, coming up with a name for it. Oh, it's the big toe, the big theory of everything, right? When you go back into the dawn of time, mystics always said that there's only one thing. There can only be one thing. And there are countless variations, elements of aspects of the one thing. And the monatomic gold, it seems to me, it allows the practitioners and users, and then you will find the monatomic gold in the most unlikely of places. You'll find them in ancient crypts and in sarcophagi for pharaohs and what have you. It's like, what is it about the monatomic gold that held such fascination and uh, almost an obsession, if you will, with the initiates of the past? What did they know about it, which somehow has been lost through this process of academic, peer-reviewed paper circling the wagons kind of thing? What's been lost? And I believe that the monatomic gold is one means to kind of fast track that metaphysical potential we have within us. But there has to be a corresponding discipline associated with it. I mean, if suddenly you granted someone the ability to manifest things instantaneously, we'd just have nothing but chaos, even worse than we have now. Because most people are not in control of their thoughts. Most people are highly impulsive. Most people are subject to, being buffeted by all the forces at work against them, which they're not even aware exist. So if you suddenly granted someone like that the ability through monatomic gold to manifest, to open portals, to do things like that, there has to be some kind of discipline involved. That's why if you look back at the traditions of shamanistic traditions around the world, they really work hard to make the initiate a very disciplined, self-controlled individual. They have to be, because otherwise you're going to be using these abilities for malign purposes. If it feels good, do it. I mean, if you read a book like the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, the whole book is about all these other bad yogis out there that are always attacking people, that are always like sending doubles of themselves to cause problems for somebody else. And one of the things that you hear about in the, not so much rather, in the Hopi tradition, you always hear about the Hopi elders and the elders of this Native American tribe and that, but there are some dark elders too. These are people that have all these abilities that have gone dark side. If you look at the Aboriginal lore in Australia, there are a whole the whole corpus of literature of people from an Aboriginal background that have written books about. There's so many for what we would call in a Western tradition witches or warlocks, that element also pertains in in the Aboriginal tribes. That there are some very dark characters that use these abilities for malign purposes, essentially advancing this overall dark agenda. So it's a cautionary warning about delving into things like monatomic gold, ormus, without the proper discipline, the proper self-discipline, the proper self-control, because we all have this innate potential to be metaphysical beings, that we all have an innate ability to travel through time and space. Anyone who's had like a alternate reality experience, and I would submit that when we dream, at least some people, we have the means to go, lack of a better term, a term a friend of mine used, dimension hopping. That we not only can just sleep and get rest and what have you, and then our mind just goes off and you know, creates a set of random, rapid juxtaposed elements that have nothing to do with each other. Well, that happens too. But there are times, and I haven't figured out the causal connection here yet. There may be a number of factors, energetically, astronomical, astrological alignments, whatever the case may be, that enable someone, oftentimes without any preparatory effort or any thought. Okay, like tonight I'm going to go dimension hopping when I go to sleep. But often as not, people just find themselves in other realms, other realities, and they look quite like Earth, quite like what we're accustomed here, but there are some slight differences if someone pays attention to the nuance and the detail, right? Point being is that we have the means already to access these alternate realities, alternate dimensions. Deep black elements in the military, certainly these non-human races, some of them that have this ability, already exploit this capability, already go into alternate realities, alternate dimensions. I believe that it's an innate capability that many humans, especially in the olden days, when mysticism and science, again, were two sides of the same coin, that there was an understanding that we have the means to go into other realms, bring back knowledge, bring back understanding to help our own reality, to make our own reality a better place, right? We have the potential to do that. Monoatomic gold, I feel, has that could be one use for it to help us become more interdimensional, more metaphysical in nature. And again, but that comes with a discipline. You just can't eat Big Macs and you know oil saturated French fries all the time and expect to be able to do these things, right? There has to be some degree of self discipline involved, and that will screen out a lot of the wannabes, quite frankly. Now we get a taste of this. I've never done plant medicine, but I have friends, people that I know and trust implicitly, and they've done ayahuasca and they've done other forms of plant medicine, and they've told me about the things they were able to see and perceive. As a young boy, I was really into the Carlos Castaneda books. I devoured them like nobody's business, right? And and because of my background growing up, I was really deeply immersed in Greek mythology and that kind of thing. So all those tales of these demigod, half alien, if you will, half human heroes, right? With one or other gods as their parentage, going out doing these great heroic deeds. To me, that always seemed to me to be there was something to that. That these weren't just stories that were handed down to placate children or something. That there was a basis for all these stories. And now because of the the genetic hybridization, genetic engineering going on, they literally have the means at a surface level now, have been for some time, to create chimeras, beings that life forms that were never meant to exist as we understand it, right? They now have the means to create all these beings. Now, that harkens back to Atlantean times, right? The ability to create these chimeras, these hybrid creatures that are a cross between humans and this, that, and the other life form. That's not to say that beings like goat men, dog men, the Minotaur, etc., only came about as a result of genetic engineering on the part of Atlanteans, aliens, or someone else. Some of these beings may have come come about through perfectly normal natural means, but it's also quite possible that such beings were captured, genetically engineered, exploited, if you will, to create more of them for like a subject warrior kind of caste or some kind of slave race, and this all ties into this monatomic gold because the potential exists to do all these things, but use them in a benevolent, charitable manner, right? It's not if it feels good, do it. What we have to do is be able to use our full potentiality in a way that divests us from the controllers, put us beyond their reach from a frequency bandwidth standpoint. Right now, we're well within their bandwidth. of control, because everything that's been done to us in the educational system and all the poisons and toxins we're ingesting on a daily basis, right? We're well in the frequency bandwidth of control. I believe that one of the things we need to do is get beyond their frequency bandwidth of control, where try as they might, they can't influence us malignly or otherwise, right? But still have access to higher, like you talked about a muse earlier. And a lot of us have this kind of muse thing where we just get an epiphany or a download from somewhere when we're having a quiet moment. And if you look at the educational system and the way the mass media works, it's always done to fragment consciousness, mute consciousness, where they can't make these simple connections anymore and have an intuitive understanding because as a society and individually, we're shame-based individuals. So one of the tricks that we have to learn is to be comfortable in our own skin and be able to recognize that our bodies and our energy bodies is one big information field, one big radar, advanced early warning detection system, right? So many of these shame-based people out there that are now these foaming at the mouth social justice warriors, they have been completely disconnected from the source of all that is because they're so shame-based. They've got to do some of them got to do so many extreme body modifications. They don't even look human anymore, right? So that's how they get separated from source because they're all in their headspace, which is a happy hunting ground for these archontic entities and putting all these intrusive thoughts. If your listeners get a chance, plug into the work of Jerry Marzinski. I've had him on my show before. He spent 30 years working with in the prison system in Arizona, but also in the largest insane asylum in Georgia for many years. And he worked with many people that had all these attached entities and all these intrusive voices and thoughts coming into their heads, especially after they got hooked on methamphetamine, et cetera, et cetera. Point being is that those are extreme. Let me rephrase it. They're not really extreme examples, but they're abundant examples of non-human, non-corporeal forces injecting thoughts into people in the guise of a person's own thought voice. So people think they're thinking about something because it's in their own thought voice, if you will, but really it's these non-corporeal marauding entities, right? So what do they do with all these social justice warriors? They put them permanently in their headspace where they can just these entities and the counselors and all the social justice warrior advocates around them can just constantly inject their mind with more and more vile, more and more filth, more and more hatred and animosity, right? And so that means that they're just not embodied anymore. They can't feel, right? I mean, when you get that gut instinct, when you get that feeling in your chest area, when you get that feeling in your midriff, and from a metaphysical standpoint, our midsection is our knowledge base. That's our. I mean, Carlos Castaneda talks about this. His mentor Don Juan Maida said that a seer, a nagual in their tradition, can see that humans are actually these luminous egg-like cocoons with an infinite number of tendrils or tentacles extending in every direction, attaching itself to infinity, essentially, right? So that core, that egg within us, that luminous egg, that's our metaphysical intelligence center. And what have they done? They've separated people from that and got them into their headspace, right? So, I know I'm bouncing all over the place, but I'm just giving a social commentary of what I'm seeing of this control system. Everything militates against us becoming embodied, soul embodied, comfortable in our own skin, despite all the shame-based upbringing and background and trauma and what have you. And we get to a place where we're just not allowing our shame-based upbringing and the trauma and what have you to malignly, negatively influence us and those around us, right? That's a tall order, right? I mean, it takes a lifetime of work to get to that stage, right? And it's in some cases lifetimes of work. Anyway, again, I don't know if I answered your question, Jock.
Well, you you not only answered my question, but you answered a whole bunch of other questions. Now I know your time is short, and I just wanted to show people 5 pound what 5 pounds of cacao looks like. Wildly organic cacao powder, and I have 5 pounds of it because why buy 1 pound and then buy another and buy another when you could just buy five? So this is my connection to the muse as a writer, as I mentioned. And we have the biblical stories of Jesus performing miracles, and we have the story of the wise men who gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, I
Yeah.
think that frankincense and myrrh were likely um, defenses against archontic entities. That's just my intuition. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that a nomad family traveling through the desert does not need a heavy bar of gold to weigh them down. So, what kind of gold was Jesus given? Well, I think the baby Jesus in this story was given white powder gold, and white powder gold would be a magical element that could give a person levitation powers so that maybe walking on water is something you can do when you've ingested white powder gold. Now, he did also go to the Essene school. When you're talking about wisdom and training and discipline, he was in the Essene school for many, many years. So it wasn't just that they said, "Hey, kid, have some white powder gold and go levitate and perform miracles and heal people." They said, "We're going to have you go to this school, and you're going to be a very disciplined person, and you're going to also use this white powder gold." Now, that's a possibility. Um, these monatomic elements seem to be the key to so many things, and I think that's why the academic system keeps them out of the education program. Um, one more thing on white powder gold, and then I'm going to ask you about where we should put our focus, and then I know you have to go. Was there any particular relationship that you know of between dragons and white powder gold?
Well, I mean, if you look at the lore that it's been passed down, and to be sure, there's been some degree of corruption, right? Like, for example, when you see the ancient Egyptian reliefs and mosaics of, a Neter, a god or goddess, holding an oversized ankh, holding a hook kind of metallic device. The tendency, especially amongst Egyptologists, is, oh, that like it reeks of symbolic significance. So wait a minute. What if those are really power tools? What if the tradition of the kings and queens holding rods with encrusted with jewels at the end wasn't so much a ceremonial thing, but really that harkens back to a time when they had power tools, when they had technology, right? So I'm almost looking at it from like a literal standpoint that okay, we have to look at this from like how was these substances used in the past. Now, if you look at the dragon lore, oftentimes what were they guarding? A hoard of gold, a hold of gold coins, a hold of some kind of fortune, right? So what if, in our example, one of the things they were guarding were the secrets and the means of creating monatomic gold? Because if what I said earlier about these dragons being sensitive, sensible, benevolent beings, there's any truth to that and how they were hijacked by these snake entities, what if these dragons being higher dimensional, really intelligent beings, if they had an understanding that monatomic gold can be misused for malign purposes, right? So part of their reason for existence, if you will, at least a part of it, was to ensure that only those properly initiated, the self-discipline, the rigors of discipline, et cetera, can access and utilize this capability, right? And then you look at some of these, and an example of where you have this bastardization, corruption, if you will, of ancient pre-Atlantean traditions and how they've been passed down and corrupted over time. What if, aside from the use of cocoa leaves, cocaine, if you will, to enable travelers, to enable porters carrying stuff, to be able to, traverse the mountain ranges of the Andes with relatively little difficulty. Okay, there's a pragmatic use for it, right? But what if this concept of monatomic gold powder was corrupted and then it manifests itself in the form of injection of cocaine, powder, et cetera, et cetera. What if that was an attempt to reacquire this, at one point, this ancient native understanding, right? Because they say that they found cocaine, elements of cocaine, traces of cocaine in some of the sarcophagi of the pharaonic dynasties. Like these guys were cokeheads. Okay, so and then also in some of the Incan mummies in South America, likewise they found cocaine. And if I'm wrong about this, please correct me. But what if all that was an effort to reacquire the knowledge through monatomic gold, but somehow was, corrupted and somehow went off on a tangent instead of monatomic gold, ormus, that kind of thing. It branched off into this, cocaine kind of outer thing, which has been with humanity for a long time now, and all the problems that that it's caused. Think of the CIA Contra drug wars. This is one example, right? So I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. I've thought about this too. That uh, I think that there has been some derivation or bastardization of the intent and uh, the original understanding of what monatomic gold powder was all about. And this is why, in part, sniffing cocaine, ingesting cocaine, and other powders such as crystal methadone have become so prevalent in our society because it may be at some level in the deepest recesses of our consciousness and our soul memory that there was something to do with a white powder that enabled humans to get to that next level of understanding. But then that all got all corrupted. Oh, I need a boost. I have a long weekend. I'm gonna go run a marathon. I mean, it baffles me how all these athletes, if you remember the 1970s baseball scandals where these haters were going to major league clubhouses selling cocaine. It's like it would never occur to me, oh, I want to get better at my craft, my sport, so I'm gonna snort coke. It's like that's a great way to amp up your heart rate, pal. You know, but but the way it affects the minds of people, it's complete. It's like a mirror image, a bass backwards mirror image of what monoatomic gold powder was all about, how the cocaine and derivatives of the various derivatives of speed, crystal methadone known as crank, and not only that though, but how the illicit uh, stimulants in powder form, whether snorted or injected, how they radically open people up to entity possession. Radically, it's a fast track to being taken over by entities. So we have this weird dichotomy at work. Like they in the past, they knew about the potential that monatomic gold has, for individuals and collectively as a race. But then somehow along the way, the Archontic forces came along, and now in its form, in its, we're replaced with cocaine and other substance abuse. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's to me, it seems to have happened that way, that we've forgotten about our roots once again. Our past has been utterly changed and eradicated, and now in its place, instead of like walking around with these power tools and ankhs and what have you, they walk around with these ceremonial objects, right? They just think it's of symbolic value. Same thing with the powder, same thing with the dragons protecting the hoard of riches, right? And riches could be a metaphor,
Right.
okay? It's like, well, gold, jewelry, the golden fleece, right? These could be metaphors for monatomic gold, right? This or the old story about the at the base of the rainbow is a pot of gold, which supposedly the elves or the fairies or whoever are guarding over. So again, there's this notion of protecting, uh, keeping occulted, i.e., hidden, these secrets, which can unlock and open things up. But in its place, we get cocaine, we get crystal methadone. You see what I mean? And,
Right.
and that's par for the course in this archontic controlled world. Everything is an inversion. Everything is completely bass backwards, which is a level of stupidity many orders of magnitude above ass backwards, bass backwards. Okay. So anyhow,
Well,
I really enjoyed talking to you. This has been really interesting,
you too.
and
And
I really appreciate the questions too. You're bringing up some key points.
good. Well, I obviously the advanced races know that monoatomic gold is key because, as Ken Rolla tells us, they use it to coat their spacecraft to
Yes.
to travel through different dimensions, different densities, different frequency ranges. And they do this because monatomic gold is a multidimensional element. It exists in other dimensions at the
Yes,
same
it
time
does.
it exists in this one.
There's definitely a quantum aspect to it where it can coexist in more than one place.
So the stability of this element helps space travelers go through dimensions. And I always wonder if maybe dragons are using it too, and maybe ingesting it to help them travel through dimensions. I don't know. But Vanessa Lyle said that she also got information from the ether saying that the internal components of spacecraft are also coated with that her Pleiadian guide told her that these internal components are coated with white powder gold too. So that's two really good sources of intel saying that advanced races are using white powder gold to coat their spacecraft. So this is amazing. Well, in the last minute or two that you have, can you give us your thoughts on where we should put our focus as we transition from a slave matrix to a world where we have our galactic family with us and where we have freedom to be who we are and to access our full potential?
Well, I've always been interested in military history. So, and I came from a military family. So my worldview is shaped in some measure with that. So it doesn't mean I'm necessarily right about what I'm going to explain, but we have to look at where we're at and where we came from. This may be a hard pill to swallow for some of your viewers who are new to this information, but right now, as we speak, in a number of locations above ground and underground and undersea on our planet, there is an ongoing interaction between non-human life forms, aliens, for lack of a better term, with deep black elements of the military aerospace community. It's going on in places like Mount Hayes, Alaska, Dulce, New Mexico, uh, El Yunque Forest in Puerto Rico. Uh, these kinds of non-human military interactions have taken place at Rendlesham Forest, et cetera, near the twin former NATO bases, RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters. And if we look at the beginning, how do we get there? It was a slippery slope because in the late 1940s, we had a series of crashes, and there were a number of crash retrievals with alien technology before Roswell. Roswell was just a bonanza of components because one of the craft exploded in midair, and it's thrown all these components onto a vast debris field. And out of that debris field was the basis for fiber optics, microcircuitry, which was later developed, particularly in MIT, et cetera, et cetera. And then you fast forward to today, you look at the mystery ingredients and some of the stabinations, let's say, not just the mRNA aspect, but the little hydras, the little nanotech uh, particulates, the nano computer chips that are found in these ingredients, right? Wright brothers got off the ground in 1903. Fast forward today, that is a quantum progression exponential leap, which can only be explained if the powers that be, who I would submit have been in cahoots with some of these negative archontic entities from the dawn of time. And we see examples intermittently moving forward. You have the Watchtower magical workings of Dr. John Dee, the astrologer royal for Queen Elizabeth I, working with Edmund Kelly, working with the angels of the watchtowers who were giving them all this advice about, the British Empire taking over the world, et cetera, et cetera. We see this as a recurring theme in spiritualism, where a lot of these people back in the day had communed or interacted with beings who told them about this promised golden future of a world government where everyone's happy, everything's hunky dory. But of course, that's not what these entities, really have in mind. So how do we go from crash retrievals in the early 1940s and before, mid early 1940s, to today when we have ongoing interactions with deep black elements of the military aerospace community? I think we need to go back and look at the early committees that were formed as a result of Roswell and other crash retrievals. The Majestic 12, very important. That was a real organization that existed. The original 12 members of Majestic 12 were at the top of their field. These weren't just a bunch of cast-off wannabes. They didn't go dumpster diving to find these people. If you looked at their background, General Hoyt Vandenberg, Admiral Sidney Sowers, Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was the dean of MIT, et cetera, et cetera. These people were at the top of their field. They were experts in science, experts in intelligence, experts in compartmentalization and research and development. And we look at the committees that were created, and we also look at how the Manhattan Project became the Atomic Energy Commission on the civilian side and became the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project on the other, which after a number of name changes became Defense Nuclear Agency, and how they were intimately involved in the back engineering, research, and development, how from there it branched out into the aerospace corporation that had a lot of the technology, a lot of facilities to study and exploit this technology, and how that technology was seeded into society, mainstream society. Everyone's walking around magnetically, hypnotically glued to their. I see them all the time walking in the streets. The young little girls, come on, little situational awareness. Pay attention to your surroundings, not on your phone, right? And then Paul Ponsot pointed this out to me that when we were talking about Edmund Kelly and Dr. John Dee and how Kelly would be the scryer, he'd be looking into this black cloth and he would get all these visions, what have you. What are these digital devices? They're black screen devices, right? And the original motivation for creating television was to interact with non-human beings, right? So, point being is that we have to look at the stages. How do we get to the point we're at now, where deep black elements of the military, including politicians, including financiers, including aerospace people, interact on a daily basis with non-human beings? When they tell us these things are impossible, when mainstream science once again says all this is impossible, but just as these initiates in the Golden Dawn, Argentium Astrium, Ordo Templi Orientis, all along, going back to ancient times, all along the high priestesses, this astronomer priesthood had been all along interacting with non-human beings, and it's still going on. Okay, but now that there's a technological twist to it, thanks to the bonanza in the form of the Roswell crash retrieval, an entire debris field of various components, which otherwise probably would have been inaccessible. There have been a number of times when they recovered craft, they could not open these things, right? They just store them, but they can't do anything with them. Roswell was different. Roswell was a gigantic debris field with a huge gouge, a couple hundred yards long, where the craft skidded, and then a larger part of it blew up and rained all these components down onto the debris field. And we talk nowadays about meta metal. The Roswell witnesses were saying that you held the metallic water-like alloy in your hand, and it would drip between your fingers. And then when you lay it flat on a table, it resumed its normal shape. Where did we see that before? Terminator 2. Uh, you know, where the Arnold came back as a good Terminator. The bad Terminator took over as a host, this cop, and the bad Terminator had this metallic water alloy capability where he could be sliced and diced so that he can just reintegrate and he can turn himself flat into water. Where do we hear that from? The Roswell witnesses. That's where that came from. Okay. So anyhow, I've got a boogie. Hope I answered your question, but I think that from a historical standpoint, we need to know how we got from A to B, right? And I think that if we understood that, it'll help us to accept more readily the fact that this is a completely controlled paradigm we live in. We're just walled off from all the real technology, taught scarcity, in the form of fossil fuels and everything else. And well, we're going to the wind turbines and, we're moving away from, because we're just nasty carbon life forms. We have to eradicate ourselves to save the planet. Well, who does this benefit? It certainly doesn't benefit the human race. So I would encourage people to look at this from the standpoint of who does it benefit? It doesn't benefit power mad bankers because all outward experiences, they look human, but they're not really human. Some of these power mad bankers and others like them are hybrids between the reptilian human races. I encourage you listeners to plug into the work of Pierre Sabach. I've had him on my show. He goes into etymological roots of all this stuff. The Watchers, all the different names for all these non-human entities, the shining ones, it all tracks back etymologically to serpents, reptilians, lizard beings. Okay. Anyhow, thank you once again, Jock, for having me on your show. And I'd love to have you on my show sometime as well.
I'd love to come on. And, Stephen Greer said that the Roswell crash was created because of scalar weaponry being used for the first time by our secret military. So it's not just that advanced races are so stupid that they're just going to have their craft explode and crash on our planet. We were taking them down with scalar weaponry, presumably. So that's an incredible moment in history when that happened. Well, thank you again, James, and I'm going to just get some cacao and keep working against the archonic forces because that helps me to stay positive and to sort of push down that mild depression that I think all of us feel, you know.
Yes.
And I'm going to keep working with the monatomic gold in a disciplined way, and and try to do what Jesus said, which he said that these things that I do, ye shall do greater. And I think
Yes.
each of
Greater.
us,
Yeah.
we have the potential to be great to do great things in our lives, and that's been laid out for us in ancient texts. So thank you again, and we're going to take your wisdom on and see how we can do in our own lives day to day now.
Thank you, Jock. And to listeners out there, my regards to you, and definitely thank you for supporting Jock and all his work. Take it easy.
Okay,
Bye.
take care, James. Bye bye.